Welcome, welcome everyone. This is Jim Spohrer with ISSIP, and today I'm going to turn it over to Vittal to introduce this speaker series in just a minute. Apologies that my microphone is low. I'll try to speak loud, but please do remember to keep yourself on mute and also put questions in the chat. And with that, Vittal, I'll turn it over to you and ask you to, I'll advance the slides.
Thank you very much, Jim. My hearty welcome to all our panelists. This is a very fantastic panel that Jim has put together. I see some of our students joining in, so I'm sure it will be a fantastic learning opportunity for all of us and a nice animated discussion. So my name is Vittal Prabhu. I'm a faculty in Penn State's Industrial and Manufacturing Engineering Department. I also shepherd a effort within our department in service systems engineering. So many years ago, what happened is many of our alumni who were essentially trained like me in manufacturing and classical industrial engineering disciplines went on to have stellar careers in the service sector. They came back and started telling us, hey, look, there's tons of opportunities for engineers in services. So maybe you should start educating engineers and making them aware of the opportunities. So that's the reason we have the title of this series of panel discussions as Engineering the 21st Century Service Economy. As we all know, over 80% of the economy, especially in the US, is in the service sector. So we'd like to inform and educate not only our students, but the public at large of what it means to engineer service systems, and this is one of the ways they would like to do it. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Second one in the series. Please be on mute if you're not speaking. And this is the second one in the series. We did healthcare. That recording's already out to the ISSIP community. This session, this 1 hour session, we're going to focus on the industry transformation of finance. In August, we'll do education, then retail and hospitality, supply chain and logistics, energy and information technology. So those will be coming up. And certainly finance has been in the news. In fact, some people are saying that finance is going to be the bellwether for other industry transformations. So that could be very interesting. The focus of this series, as we think about industry transformations, we're thinking about what types of measures will be important industry by industry. And I'm going to go ahead and try to mute. Let's see. There we go. Sorry about that. As we think about the industries, how they're going to transform, one of the
picture of me at I/O last year when we announced BARD.
Sorry, I got to keep muting people. Please do stay on mute if you're not speaking. As we think about the transformation of different industry sectors, certainly the marginal cost of computing is going down. That's costs are going down. Productivity is going up. And we have to start thinking about which service system characteristics we want to measure. There certainly is a lot of concern about energy and climate. There's also concerns about skills and jobs. And there's a lot of concern about how institutions invest in a new social contract. As we look at the landscape, this is Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, the most valuable company on the planet now. And in this video, and by the way, the slides will be available and there's links to this talk, he talks about the marginal cost of computing going to zero. And of course, this is causing an explosion of new types of digital service. we're starting to see service robots. We're starting to see digital twins of people. All of this should boost productivity. And this is my version of Moore's law. And you can see the diagonals are the cost of computing going to zero. Exascale is the computing power of a human brain, which is expected to go to $1,000 by 2060. So massive amounts of computing are coming. But what will be the measures? And we've assembled a group of panelists today to give us different perspectives. Some are from the financial sector, some take a broader view of the economy in general. And our goal is really to share with the ISSIP community a broad spectrum of experts' insights on how they think the financial sector will transform and the broader economy. So with that, I want to turn it over to Shanker. I have your slides queued up. And let me bring up your first slide, Shanker. Shanker Ramamurthy from IBM, and you can feel free to introduce yourself and take us through your slides. We'll try to keep it to about 5 minutes per panelist and then open it up to Q&A. Please put questions into the chat.
Hey, thank you, Jim, for that introduction, colleagues. What I thought I would do is spend a few minutes talking about the 2024 CEO study that we just wrapped up in IBM Institute for Business Value. I'm part of IBM Consulting. I'm the global managing partner for a banking financial markets consulting practice. The CEO study is something we do every year or so, along with a bunch of other CXO studies. And this particular study was really focused on generative AI. And Jim talked about marginal cost of computing. Truthfully, with this new era of generative AI, it's one of those exponential technologies that's got the potential to dramatically drop the marginal cost of knowledge, potentially the marginal cost of intelligence itself, and put that on some kind of a, log exponential, reverse exponential curve. So really exciting times ahead. And this particular study was really focused on getting a CEO perspective of how they're seeing this playing out. If you go to the next chart, Jim. Like I said, we do this on a regular basis. This one, we spoke to CEOs from 26 industries in over 30 countries around the world, 2,500 CEOs, of which about 350 were from financial services. And let me kind of, in the next couple, 3 minutes, highlight the key things that popped out of the study that would be of interest to this audience. And if you got any questions, post them up and we will address them as part of the Q&A. Next chart, please. This is generative AI is one of those technologies that's truthfully hitting every aspect of the enterprise. And if you think about the opportunity canvas, productivity, and again, back to this marginal cost notion, productivity is an area where generative AI is having a powerful impact, and it's touching every aspect of the enterprise. There will always, at least as of today, there's always going to be a human in the loop. But if yesterday you designed for, an analog process and you started to increase the digitization, increasingly you're able to flip that paradigm and start with designing an entirely digital process and then inserting humans in the loop for exception processing. Everything to do with the customer and customer experience has the potential to be dramatically improved by generative AI. Personalization, frictionless ways of collaborating, interacting, new delivery channels, new ways of servicing, and cross-sell and upsell and marketing. And they're all up for grabs in generative AI. Importantly, we do see entirely new business models getting created on the back of generative AI as well. Just talking to financial services, if the traditional financial services model is like a pyramid with customer-facing functions at the top of the pyramid, maybe a third of the activities, and the balance 2/3 are middle and back office processes. On the back of exponential technologies, of which cloud is one, hybrid cloud, generative AI is another, and increasingly in time, quantum computing, that model is getting flipped on its head with the middle and back office getting increasingly digitized, with extraordinary value getting unlocked around channels, partnerships, and ecosystems. And importantly, the fourth element here, for the first time, the software development lifecycle and virtually every aspect of technology, the software development lifecycle and information technology itself is getting more productive and getting accelerated through the infusion of generative AI, whether it be code creation or whether it be testing or whether it be DevOps or FinOps. Every aspect of the entire software development lifecycle is getting rapidly accelerated through generative AI. Next chart. So the CEOs talked about 5 pillars that are required to genuinely transform their businesses and get value from generative AI. Strategy, you got to think, broadly enough, and you got to innovate fast enough on the strategy front. Generative AI is going to be a multi-model, multi-modal world, and you got to manage that on an enterprise level rather than just letting 1,000 flowers bloom, because you got legal issues, regulatory issues, customer issues, governance, security issues, cyber issues to deal with. So this has got to be handled on an enterprise scale with the appropriate governance structure and control model around it. Data is interesting. If the large language models of today have pretty much ingested and converted into neural network models virtually all of the generally available, publicly available data, if you look at what's happening within enterprise boundaries, 99% of the data is still not available to generative AI in a neural network deep learning context. And so marrying that external large language context with the internal data and unlocking the economic value there and putting the right models in place represents an extraordinary opportunity over the next decade. And along with that comes transforming the operating model. That's thinking about every aspect of what is getting done and fundamentally reimagine the art of the possible. And last but not least, it's about people. It's about making the employees more productive and driving efficiency. It's about new skills. And in fact, the CEOs talked about entirely new roles they're recruiting for, new career models in this generative AI and AI-driven organization of tomorrow. Tremendous potential ahead. Now, on the last chart before I turn it over to my co-panelists, there are several hard truths that the CEOs talked about, right? One is about the people. In fact, 51% of the CEOs we talked to said they're hiring for generative AI-related roles that do not even exist within their enterprise today. They recognize that they've got to put entirely new products and services innovation as a top priority over the coming years, because the customer knows what the customer knows, but there are entirely new capabilities getting created that enable new types of products, new types of services, new types of capabilities that's going to change the nature of what's offered from a product, feature, service standpoint. The CEOs also talked about the fact in the past they've used a lot of technology shortcuts, and of course, in financial services, but not just in financial services. There's a lot of legacy technology, and there's a lot of technology debt. And so managing that technology debt, enabling generative AI's capabilities to accelerate software development lifecycle, to cut through that technology debt is a huge opportunity on the one hand, challenge on the other. Bringing the leaders together and reimagining the art of the possible within the enterprise is an issue that CEOs talked about. Generative AI and AI expertise is in short supply. And so winning, the CEOs talked about, is going to require reconfiguring their ecosystem and their business partnerships. No one's going to do it all by themselves. How you bring that ecosystem together is going to separate the winners from the losers. And last but importantly, really importantly, bringing the people along, their employees and executives along on this journey to unlock the art of the possible is the opportunity that CEOs are grappling with and working on. A couple of quotes to wrap it up on the next chart, which I'm sure you will relate to. One CEO said to us, hey, AI is so important that as AI develops, there will be three types of executives and employees and people: those who create AI, those who use AI, and importantly, those that will be used by AI. And then another CEO said, I'm relooking at my own strategy and radically transforming it, because if someone else destroys our old business model, we will be ruined. But if we destroy our own business model, we will survive and potentially thrive. Exciting and interesting times ahead. Those of you who want to know more, you can double click on the link below, and the actual CEO study, 2024 CEO study, is available for all of you to download the document. With that, Jim, let me hand the floor back to you.
Great. Thank you, Shanker. And again, apologies that my audio is a little low, but the slides will be posted to ISSIP SlideShare, and you will be able to click on those links. But also, if you want to just snap a picture, that's another way to do it. So our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce, is Kartik Gada. Kartik is a very good colleague of mine out here in Silicon Valley. He and I went to Google. He gave a Google talk on the Atom, which is now rebranded to Third Millennium Economics. And Kartik, could you share with us your thoughts in the next 4 to 5 minutes, please?
Absolutely. So going back several decades, I had a knack for noticing these exponential technologies, and especially the cost side of it, how when the cost of something was getting lower, it became more accessible, and it would become a component of other products, and hence other businesses and so forth. And this goes back to the 1980s when I was 10 years old. And over time, like in the early 2000s, I began to notice that, sure, everyone talks about Moore's Law and then storage also dropping in price, but how did that roll up to the top of the economy? When a computer is getting cheaper and cheaper, people are saving that money, or they're buying not one computer for their home, but 2, 3, or 4. Now all kids have laptops and smartphones, whereas not that long ago, there was one household PC, for example, and one household phone. And I thought, well, what percentage of the total economy is going in that direction? And I made this estimation under the accelerating rate of change, which many people here may be familiar with. Ray Kurzweil and Carl Sagan some decades ago brought some familiarity to that. And I have done a lot of work in putting an economic dimension to that, about how these exponential technologies translate to businesses and roll up to the top of the economy and have a recursive feedback loop of faster and faster innovation that is itself accelerating. So generative AI, everyone's been talking about it, but I've been in AI for more than a decade, and this is happening right on schedule from things I wrote in my publication 8 years ago, the Google talk that Jim mentioned. That was almost 8 years ago, December 2nd, 2016. So if you look at the top box here about this reinforcing feedback loop, high-tech advancement increases productivity, as everyone here would agree, and reduces costs sharply, especially through dematerialization. That slide Jim showed about the NVIDIA chip replacing an entire data center and being cheaper than even the cables, the non-high-tech part of the data center. It's cheaper than even that. There's countless other examples of all that. Before, everyone had standalone calculators. Now a calculator is one of the 50 things on your phone and your PC. It's completely dematerialized. It can never break or get lost or go missing or anything unless your phone goes missing. So then you go to the second box, non-material knowledge-based goods alter economic assumptions because they meet infinite demand with almost no variable cost per unit. Traditional classical economics, which we call second millennium economics, was valid for its time because they believed, well, when there's too much money, then there's too much money chasing too few goods, and the price of houses and cars would rise, for example. And that was true, let's say, in 1970. And that's why there was inflation in the 1970s, when there was a lot of liquidity in the market that way. But as you have software, for example, the marginal cost being almost zero, it can cater to infinite demand. If there is a certain software package available for download and 1 million more people want it tomorrow, the price doesn't have to rise. It has no shortage. It doesn't have to worry about inventories or shipping or anything like that. So it is a dematerialized good. And fine, it is just one package of software, but that is rising as a percentage of the economy. In the estimations I did, at the turn of this century, 2000, it was maybe 0.5% of the world economy was such high-tech goods. By 2008, 1%, 2016, 2%. Now 2024, 4%. 4% is a lot. And notice that each of those doublings was exponential, not linear. 8 years from now, it could very well be 8%. That's when all the technologies we consider high-tech today will still be primitive and commoditized. We'll be talking about something even much more advanced. So if we go to box 3, economically, knowledge-based good cause a monetary supply gap because each of these things is cost reducing and deflationary, that causes a need to increase the money supply in the economy. And all economics textbooks, which are from a time 50 to 60 years ago, still under second millennium economics, they would say, well, this would cause inflation. But in the last 14, 15 years, about $30 trillion has been printed through quantitative easing. It wasn't only through COVID. It began in 2009 and never stopped. And in my materials, which I'll talk about at the end, you can see all the progression charts. That is itself rising exponentially. Traditional economic thought has no explanation for this at all, but this is very much in accordance with what I've been saying. This is just designed to make sure the money gap is filled. Otherwise, the economy would go into deflation on account of technology becoming more and more of it, and there has to be enough liquidity for enough transactions and startups and for a debt-based economy not to go under. So when you combine the deflationary effect of technology with the accelerating exponential nature of all innovation, generative AI being the hottest one right now, but all technologies, whether you consider photovoltaics, batteries for electric cars, everything we can think about, you have this effect of exponential deflation, but also the opportunity for exponential economic progress, going to box 5, because economic progress, either directly or indirectly, is almost entirely a byproduct of technological progress. Go back to the 1440s, the Gutenberg printing press. That was almost 600 years ago, but books had to be handwritten before that point, and there were only 10,000 books in all of Europe. Only a couple percentage of people could read, the clergy and the monks. Even the kings, the monarchs, were illiterate at the time. But because of the Gutenberg printing press, which is still low-tech by today's standards, but because they could make multiple copies of the same book, we went from 10,000 books to 10 million books in Europe within a relatively short time, in the 15th century. And now there's many, many more examples of that. In a dematerialized world, you don't even have hard copy books anymore. When a book's available on Kindle, 20 million people could buy it tomorrow if they want. There's no shipping and printing and binding and retail store distribution required. So all this is exponentially increasing. Generative AI, one of the technologies speeding this further up, causing more deflation. When we talk about 54% of banking jobs could be vulnerable to automation, yeah, so that means the bank is saving that money. Will our fees go down? Not willingly by the bank, but under competitive pressure, the fees we face by being customers of the bank will go down because there's fewer people to support, right?
One minute left.
Yeah, 1 minute. And therefore, when you have this convergence of more and more of the economy into high tech, and I define high tech as 10% a year exponential cost improvement, Moore's law is 58% a year if it were doubling it every 18 months. Some things are higher than that. Some things are lower than that. Batteries are maybe 6 or 7% a year, photovoltaics 5% a year. But all of these are high tech or near high tech goods that are exponential and therefore deflationary in nature, causing a money supply gap and therefore a need to increase more liquidity, which leads us to certain inevitable conclusions, such as, hey, if 54% of bank jobs can be automated, why not 54% of government jobs? And then the cost of government should go down by that much. And therefore the taxes we need to pay should also go down by that much because we're getting the same government services for less than half as many people. And why not? So that's the cost of government. And then why not fund that with the output of automation? If automation is doing 50% of all work, then why not have income tax generated by exactly what the automation is throwing off as well? So I have all these details on how this transition could work in my book. Now, the world is not politically ready for this discussion, but economically and technologically, it is possible to say we could have a stronger or better safety net than we have today, and yet income taxes on humans can be gradually reduced to zero because automation is generating all of that output, right? And therefore, going to box 7, the green box, a rethinking of macroeconomics is needed to reflect these changes because formal economics thought is many decades behind. They don't have the answers to a lot of the things that we're seeing. They cannot explain why NVIDIA is $3 trillion and how this is exponential. We did not have a company cross $1 trillion in market cap until 2018. Seems like an eternity ago. 2018 was the first $1 trillion company. Now we have a couple of companies above 3 trillion and 8 or 9 that are above 1 trillion. And 6 or 7 years from now, there'll be so many above 1 trillion that we won't even be able to name them all. And it'll be very simple for a startup that's just a team of 3 people to get to $1 billion status. That won't even be called unicorn anymore because it'll be so common. Yep. So I have a lot of materials, and these are 8 bullets that summarize the boxes I described. But those who are interested in all the mechanics of how this transition to an automated government, exponential economic growth, and et cetera, can occur, can look at my materials, which are my publication, my YouTube channel, which I put a lot of effort into, about 3,000 subscribers there. And with one closing thought, consider that half of all economic progress, even if you go by the conservative measure of GDP, when in fact you should go by the market cap of the stock market, the S&P 500 for a worldwide basis even, half of all economic progress that has ever occurred for all of humanity has happened in the 21st century itself. Think about that. Half that has ever happened has happened in just the 21st century. And that also means there will be a time in the relatively near future, 8, 10, 12 years from now, where we can say half of all economic progress that ever occurred happened after 2024. So what we have today will still be the halfway point relative to that relatively near future, because this is exponential and rising in the second derivative. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kartik. And for folks, definitely check out his book and his YouTube channel. But now I'd like to transition to Robert Kozma, Bob, if you don't mind. I'll say Bob. Bob is an author, a service designer, and Bob, if you could introduce yourself and take us through your material, that would be great. Oh,
everyone else, it's a pleasure to be here. We can slide. I'm an emeritus principal scientist from SRI International in Silicon Valley. Prior to that, I was a professor at the University of Michigan. My field is actually education with a special technology. And after retiring, working various companies, Microsoft, and organizations such as OECD, UNESCO, and so on, consulting on how to.
Bob, you're breaking up, unfortunately. Your bandwidth.
Oh.
Yeah. Bob, you might go for video so that we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, go off video maybe.
Okay. Oh, all right, fine. Just a moment, please. Okay.
Great. Yeah, we're showing your intro slide with your title in your book. But I'm happy.
In my retirement, I took a step back from the kinds of things that we're talking about here and tried to provide some perspective on how all these changes could make an impact, hopefully for the better, on the world. Go to the next slide, Jim, thanks. I thought I would reference several quotes that have had an impact on me. The first one being from my father, who told me as a young man starting off, whatever I did in life, the world a better place than I found it. And that's my studies. I took a degree in political science at the University of Michigan and read Herb Simon way back in the 60s. And in his book on Sciences of the Artificial, one of the things that he says is that everyone designs who changes existing situations into preferred ones. And that had a significant impact on me. I've always, since then, thought of myself as a designer and took his challenge as trying to change current situations into preferred ones. Another quote was from Peter Paul Verbeek, who's a rector at the University of Amsterdam and a philosopher of had a big impact on me as well, as we're thinking about designing technologies and designing applications using technology. Technology are inherently moral entities. It implies that designers are doing ethics by other means. They are materializing morality. So in my mind, that's an important consideration as we design the future using these new technologies. What morality, what principles, what moral principles are we embedding in technology? And then, of course, Sam Altman's quote, "This is the technology humanity has yet developed." I don't need to go into that in detail. But also an important quote that's had an impact on me was Milton Friedman's the New York Times editorial in 1970, where he says there's one and only one social responsibility of business, and it's to use its resources to engage in activities to This is really, to me, an important quote, because if we're thinking about designing new technologies and new applications of technologies, and we're thinking about what are the moral principles that we're embedding in these technologies, we have to take this quote seriously. And if you think this 1970s quote is no longer relevant, then you should read Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, and he reiterates all of this. So we need to be thinking about, if we're creating, for example, digital twins, and one of those digital twins is my personal assistant, but that personal assistant has access to all of the information in my computer, yet the personal assistant is owned by OpenAI or some other company, and its moral premise is to maximize the profits of that company. I have to be concerned about the advice that I'm getting from that personal assistant, as would anyone who has a digital twin who is presumably working with them on some project. So this is a kind of moral dilemma that I think we need to be thinking of. Let's go to the next slide, Jim. Okay, this first one is the Alan Turing quote that frames the Turing test going back even further in the 50s, very prescient in his belief that at the end of the century, he was off by a couple decades, but we'll give him benefit of the doubt here. Use the words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. His whole notion of the Turing test was based on computers sounding like, and actually this predated any acoustic representation that could be generated by computers. So that would mimic human interaction, verbal interaction. Clearly, we've gone beyond that test. But we haven't yet reached intelligence with the current generative AI. Other people, for example, Mustafa Suleiman, says, well, we need a new test, a new Turing test, and his would be to be able to act on the instruction, go make $1 million on retail web platform in a few months with just 100,000 investment. So let me go back to this question of embedding morality in technology. Is that the embedded test that we want for intelligence? And I propose an alternative, which is to be aspirational. If this technology is going to make a major change in the world, let's really think about an aspirational benchmark for intelligence that we embed in the technology, which is find a way to end poverty, something that we humans haven't yet figured out. That's the kind of embedding of values that we should be considering as we design these new technologies and their applications. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Bob. Very provocative. Great. I noticed when you posted that to LinkedIn, you got a lot of ISSIP people liking that comment. So I think you're speaking to a crowd that resonates well with your approach. And again, I apologize. My volume is so low. I'll get that figured out next time. Brings us to our final panelist, Eoin Cumiskey is based in London, works in MasterCard, and helps people pay for transportation. So he works with the government and MasterCard to innovate how people pay as they get around the UK. So Eoin, if you could introduce yourself, and it would be great if you could take us through your slides.
Yeah, more than happy to. I should point out, I own more than one shirt. The video was taken today, so just in case people are wondering. Yeah, my background, I began in banking, did a little bit of time around payments and sort of poacher turned gamekeeper, or perhaps a gamekeeper turned poacher, yet to be determined. I've heard some absolutely fantastic things from the previous speakers, and I would have to agree with all of them. I suppose the angle that I look at from an innovation perspective, and it's captured there in the headline, it's from idea to execution. So for the purpose of this panel, what I thought I would do, and apologies in advance if I'm going to tell you all something that you already know, but I thought I'd take a look at two particular concepts that have proven invaluable time and time again in trying to drive the idea, the innovative idea, through to execution. And this is really where, when the rubber hits the road, reality begins to set in, and innovations can take that little bit longer than expected. The first one on screen there is the Gartner hype cycle. Perhaps some of you have seen it, perhaps not. It's quite self-explanatory. You'll see that at the bottom left, you have the tech trigger, in this case, the explosion in our subject matter, AI. And I would argue we're possibly at the peak of inflated expectations. Everybody knows that something plus AI equals something plus profit. And we're just in the process of filling out those remaining gaps. The problem with the peak of inflated expectations, and really, is you enter into this valley of despair. And this is probably where we're likely to hit the next news cycle about companies that have invested in innovation and failed to see results. Now, whilst this is a crude tool, it's very useful just to keep perspective on the fact that where we go from this current Cambrian explosion of new capabilities to what the future looks like in 15, 20 years is going to be a very long and arduous journey. Some aspects of our innovative tech will fall out, some will remain, and there's plenty of literature about how you can overcome those little valleys and drops, but it's very useful when you get through to the actual implementation stage to keep that in mind. There will be challenges, and we'll discuss those a little bit further as we move on to the next slide. And then the second slide below, again, something that I'm sure people have also seen, is the innovation adoption curve. And again, quite explanatory, but effectively where we are as tech enthusiasts, we're at the start of the curve. We're developing and designing the future. Where we're lucky, we get the early adopters, our CTOs, our chief innovation officers, etc., who will enable and foster this environment that we can bring new change into. However, if you're incredibly lucky, those who actually make the decisions, those who are in the C-suite, those who are in charge of budget, those who are in charge of the strategic roadmap, if you're lucky, they're in the early majority. The vast majority of them tend to fall into the late majority. And that means that from idea to execution, the key thing that you have to work on is the change management side and getting people on board. And very quickly, one of the first speakers spoke about the change happening around strategy and target operating models and what have you. And if we think of the Kaplan and Norton aspect of the target operating model, the TOM, we talk about people, process, and technology. We've nailed the technology. It's now getting into the process of implementation and getting the people to walk along the road with you as you go forward. And what this means into the third slide, and hopefully I'm keeping to my 5 minutes. If we look at forecasting reality, and I've taken just three key elements that pop up time and time again in the financial services area. And I say this from having sold into commercial banks, working in commercial banks, being in government, and they're all, there's nothing life-changing here at the moment, but they're useful to keep in mind. First of all, regulatory requirements. And this was something that was spoken about previously. When we have new technological advances, they tend to run ahead of current regulatory frameworks, most notably crypto. What this means is that regulators like the field to develop. They like to see what direction it's going in before they will come in and place some additional guide rails around the tech. And this creates a little bit of an uncertain scenario in the early stages where management prefer to try and act like fast followers. People will say the second mouse gets the cheese. So all those little deceleration traps occur around the regulatory frameworks. The second thing that it's amazingly absent in a lot of conversations that we all have with our colleagues is the fact that this is not the first time we're trying to bring change, we're trying to bring innovation. And most companies will have established roadmaps where they're still working on closing out other innovative trends, such as big data, migration to cloud and edge. People still remember billions spent on Internet of Things that were CapExed and needed to be amortized. So the roadmap that you're injecting this new innovation into tends to be quite littered. So cutting across the noise and getting access to resource and to decision makers requires, really down to the third point, a strong business case. Just because we can do something doesn't always translate into we should do something. And we've all been in the environments where no matter how good the idea, you have to sit opposite your CFO. And if it's not going to wash its face in 5 to 10 years, or you can't put a dollar and dime figure on it, then you fall into the trap of navel gazing and solving problems for problem's sake. Now, the more astute amongst you will note that there's a little asterisk at the bottom. There's obviously notable exceptions for companies who trade in innovation, Google, Nvidia, Microsoft, etc. But forecasting reality into financial services, add 5 to 10 years, never discount the ability for people to miss trends and thoroughly understand that unless you can quantify down to the profit and loss level, the struggle to implement becomes always that little bit more difficult. Jim, apologies, I've gone about 2.5 minutes over, but hopefully I didn't go through too quickly for the attendees.
No, not at all. Thanks, Eoin. And now we're going to jump to Q&A. I'll ask the panelists to try to keep their answers as short as possible, so maybe we can get a couple in. There's a few, and please, participants, put your questions into the chat. Even if we don't get a chance to answer them today, it helps us as we build ISSIP surveys for industry transformation to get your input. So please put any links or anything that you would like us to use to inform future discussions into the chat. And again, apologies, my audio is low. But my question for the four panelists and then is to think about, we've seen a broad spectrum. We've heard the CEO report from IBM. Thank you, Shanker. That was great. We've heard Kartik's view of the third millennium economics being transformed and the acceleration continuing. We've heard Bob Kozma talk about the need for a better than Turing test that AI should help us end poverty, a very aspirational measure for the future. And then we got a good bucket of cold water or reality check. I don't want to call it cold water because it wasn't cold water. It's just be practical. This is going to take longer than you think from Eoin Cumiskey at MasterCard. So we've heard a broad spectrum of perspectives, but I just want to go through quickly with each of the panelists, starting with you, Shanker. Do you think that we have the right measures for the financial sector, or do we need some radical new thinking here? Do we have good measures, do you think?
Oh, well, I think Eoin is right. I mean, some of the initial papers I wrote 25 years ago about how the industry is going to change, we are still implementing those today. So the industry takes a long time to change. That's the nature of the industry. But regardless, the financial institution of tomorrow is going to look different from the financial institution of yesterday. And fundamentally, exponential technology in all its myriad guises is going to intervene, get woven into every aspect of what we're doing in financial services. And it takes a certain amount of reimagination to go from, hey, I've got an analog model and I'm going to infuse digitization into it, to a model that says the model can be entirely digital except for humans in the loop exception processing. I mean, that's a mindset change in terms of the art of the possible. And because it's a competitive world, admittedly with a lot of regulatory barriers, change will happen, but at a more measured pace than in other industries like technology. If I can add just one additional comment, Gary's asked a good question. I was talking about the fact that less than 1 or 2% of the data within the enterprise has really been implemented in a generative AI context. So Gary's question is, hey, why should I take proprietary data from an enterprise and put it into an AI data set? The important point here is that you take publicly open source available large language models, and then you modify them, make them your own, and the model you create is your own, not for public consumption. In other words, bring the power of a large language model into your enterprise to unlock all the potential value that's kind of locked up. I mean, the old quote from a large company, I leave the name out, basically this client said, if only company X knew what company X knew, they would be unbelievably good. And that's where generative AI can be helpful in terms of mastering the data within the enterprise boundaries in a proprietary context.
Great, thanks, Shanker. Kartik, do we have the right measures?
Not entirely, in that the right measures exist, but it's not what the economic and financial media focus on. GDP is obsolete as a measure because it assumes that people don't have any discretionary expenses, or that everyone is still in poverty and that they will spend whatever they make immediately because Otherwise, their children don't have enough food. We have seen that there are societies that are quite prosperous, but with little GDP growth while their net worth keeps rising. So for lack of a better measurement, the progress of very broad-based stock market indices, especially a technology one like the NASDAQ 100, or even the S&P 500, of which the NASDAQ is a superset, are better because they estimate both the good and bad more accurately. The rate of economic progress is faster than GDP would indicate, including nominal GDP. But inequality is also greater than GDP indicates as well, because wealthy people own the S&P 500 and many poor people don't, and therefore policy solutions have to take that into account. And I write about many of those in my book, how the central bank monetary creation can be more broad-based, retirement saving accounts immediately funded with S&P 500 ownership, as a consolidation and simplification of all these other retirement schemes that exist, so on and so forth. But so to answer the question, we do have the right metrics, but it's not what most people are being told are the metrics to look at.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kartik. Bob, I think your whole point is that we have the wrong metrics, but
Yeah.
you gave us
Right, right.
you gave us some guidance to get going in a good direction. And
Thinking about moral principles here, and what we're going to embed in our metrics as well as our technology, how it is that we're measuring the impact of technology and the designs that we create using it. I certainly agree with Kartik that the economy, the models that we're using with the economy need to change. But I think the measures that you were referring to, Kartik, are still missing that moral ingredient, the value of individuals. So, for example, productivity, you can increase productivity by, as people have pointed out, reducing the number of people that are employed, so that you end up with people who don't have an income. Now, maybe we can take care of that with guaranteed minimum income or something like that. But the current problem with that is a national narrative that we have here in the US, which is basically, if you're unemployed, it's your problem. It's not the problem of the economy or the government or anybody else. So get your act together. But if the economy is structured in a way that getting one's act together isn't going to help at all, then we've got a problem, even if we've restructured the economy.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So let's go to Eoin. Do we have the right measures? And then Vittal, if you've got a question to close us out, we're going to have about 5 minutes, I think, for your final question. So Eoin?
Yeah, so in terms of the right measures by way of how we're going to manage it, oh God, I'm going to sound so woolly on this. It depends. It really depends, and it depends primarily on social outlook, exactly as the other panelists have spoken about. The simple fact of the matter is that at every stage of automation, from the printing press through to steam, through to the motor car, we've seen greater engagement, greater employment, greater economic advancement, and so on and so forth. So technology certainly empowers that. It really comes down, it's going to be so lazy and reductionist, it really comes down to whether we're looking at a Star Wars or a Star Trek version of the future. Because we could move into a universal income situation with a managed economy whereby everybody has achieved the top of the Maslowian hierarchy, and we get into that self-fulfillment. Or to a question that's in the chat about what happens when everybody picks up AI and silos it and uses it for their own devices, we could see a sudden fragmentation of the economy. We're already witnessing a rebalkanization of the global economy. We're seeing BRICS and other alternate spheres of influence begin to emerge. So there's a high probability that this could be a force for good and a force for bad. It will ultimately come down to the success criteria that are attached to it. And I don't think there's anybody on the call here who will be making those decisions. I don't know whether he popped into view. A little 7-year-old ran past me there. It'll be his generation, those who inherit this, that decide which way this is going to go. So speculation on my part, I'd love to think that this will, to Kartik's earlier points, this will be a force for good and a force for change. But picking up, as said by Bob, unless we begin to insert those core principles into how it's utilized, it could become a free radical.
Yes, indeed. We have 5 minutes left, so probably not enough time for each panelist to do a question. But Vittal, do you have any wrap-up comments or questions?
Yeah, I'll ask one broad high-level question at the macro level.
Okay.
For anybody in the panelists, among the panelists who wants to take it on. Do you see technology helping us avert or at least reducing the probabilities of bubbles and bursts, bank runs, bank failures and such? Maybe Shanker has been with the bank so closely, you want to take that on.
Unfortunately, technology is like a tool, right? You've got effectiveness. That's an important dimension. Banks need to balance for growth, efficiency, and risk and regulatory compliance. They got to manage and optimize for all three simultaneously. It's like axiomatic that on occasion, some banks or many banks on occasion will miss one of those three, and when they drop the levels on, risk and regulatory compliance, things blow up. I mean, that happens, every generation or two around the world. I don't see that changing.
I can add a bit more there in that booms and busts will not go away at all. That's an innate nature of human psychology, but that's also a necessary part of each generation of technology, because each bust creates a low-cost situation for what in evolution is called hormesis, or adaptive diversification of all technologies. So booms and busts don't go away. They do get faster, though, because since the general trend line is getting steeper, if you take the dot-com bubble, to recover from that took whatever you consider the recovery to be, 4 to 11 years to recover. This AI bubble that we're in right now, while there will be a bust, the total duration of bust cycle will only be about 1/4 as long, that we know for sure, just because of the nature of gradients. Bank runs is more a problem of government and not having sufficient confidence in backstopping of the Federal Reserve, because those are slow institutions that only act long after there's a problem versus before. But it's a problem of how government thinks rather than something that has to be part of systemic vulnerability.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sorry, Bob, I probably was jumping into what would have been your goal, but yeah, technology, will it help resolve? Absolutely. Will it do it proactively? No, it'll do it retrospectively. So we will fail faster and we will fail more often. Hopefully we fail forward and we learn from it and iron out the wrinkles.
Yeah, Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, hey, Mark, go for it.
Hi, am I unmuted? Yes, I think I am. Hi, everybody. Happy to be part of this group. I have only a couple of seconds till my next thing. There are two concepts that I've been thinking about that may make sense in this context. One of them is to think of what I call empotech, technology that empowers. And when you do that, you have to start thinking about who you want to empower. We can have technology that empowers the rich and the powerful. We can have technology that empowers all of us. We can have technology that empowers young people. So that's kind of just a slightly different way of thinking of this. Back to Mr. Kozma, I don't know if he's here still. I liked, but I also think that a lot of things are not going to change until we change people. And one of the most interesting things that's available to us in the third millennium, in the period we're coming into, are opportunities to get rid of, to increase what I call Lego, love, empathy, gratitude, optimism, and decrease greed, abuse, and belligerence and bullying. And so unless we move ourselves in those directions, I don't think the technology is going to do anything but reflect us.
Right. Although, as just playing devil's advocate, I think Google dropped their "do no harm" catchphrase a few years back. So How you kind of hard code that in is a hell of a challenge. Definitely. a
Yeah,
hell of a
and it may
challenge.
be we have to re-hard code our genes. I mean, it may be that we literally have to start transforming who we are as humans in order to do that. And so that's but those opportunities are opening up in the third millennium, and that's to me what's very interesting. I'm sorry I have to run. It's been a great discussion. I have to go to another call, but I hope we continue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
I want to thank our panelists. Thanks again, Shanker. Thanks again, Kartik, Bob, Eoin, Vittal. Always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. I'll stop the recording now. Bye all.
Cheers all. Take care. Cheerio.